Hi, and welcome to our first episode of Be Offended Podcast. Yes, Be Offended Podcast. We don't care if you're offended, as long as you're here to listen, you're here to talk to us, you're here to have dialogue, you are here to become a better person once you leave. And if you're offended, that's okay. That's on you. I'm one of two hosts. My name is Ron Furman, and with me is the great Ryan Bellerose. Hi, Ryan.
Hey, Ron. Good to be here.
I have to be honest, and I'm being completely truthful here when I start this show. I'm a big fan of yours. I've always been a big fan of yours. I know that we're friends, so it's kind of weird for a friend to say something about another friend, but I've been wanting to do a show with you for so long. I think you are the perfect candidate for the show, and I think we can do so many incredible things. I love your opinions. I love the fact that you're not willing to stand down when being approached by anyone from the left or from the right. So I hope that we can get much of that in the show that we're about to do. First
I
up,
hope so. Looking forward to it.
I want to say happy Thanksgiving to everyone watching the show right now. Thanksgiving is one of those very, very weird holidays for me. And the reason for that is for many years, I didn't celebrate it. I thought it was some sort of a Christian pagan holiday, and I could not understand why anybody would celebrate it who is Jewish, but it became more of a Canadian holiday for me. But now I get to talk to someone who is Indigenous Canadian, and I want the truth about what does Thanksgiving actually mean to you?
Well, it's funny because it is kind of complex. And I was having this conversation actually with my friend's wife. She's here helping us today to prepare a big Thanksgiving meal. And the funny thing is, okay, so on the one hand, look, the way that it's become is kind of the celebration of the creation of Canada, and in the United States, the same thing, the creation of the United States. And they kind of gloss over the fact that there were people living here before. And I mean, you get these cute little stories about how the Indians came and helped the white people, and the white people were starving, and the Indians fed them. But they kind of gloss over the fact that the reason the white people were starving was because they did some things that kind of resulted in them starving. Like, so the easiest way for me to explain it really quick is that we use what's called passive agriculture. Okay, so native people, we didn't farm. Now you come from a culture where farming and being pastoral and having herds of sheep and stuff like that, that's like the way you live, right? We didn't have that. We were basically a hunter gatherer society across. And I'm speaking in general, but I am speaking specifically of the Cree. But this is really North American Indians. Like all of us were nomadic, we were hunter gatherers. So what we would do is called passive agriculture. What that means is when you're constantly moving around, if you go somewhere, you'd pull weeds, and you might plant a few wild onions, or drop a few wild turnips or stuff like that, a little bit of corn here and there. But most of us were not really active agriculture. We didn't have farms because we were always moving. Now, when the white people came, they were just in shock because all of these forests were very different from the forests in Europe. Forests in Europe, there's very little food in the forest anymore because for centuries and centuries, they'd been taking everything edible, right? They come here and all of a sudden they're like, wow, like there's wild onions everywhere. There's wild turnips everywhere. There's all this food. But what they weren't doing was they weren't replacing it. So when they took it, they were staying in one place. So all of a sudden, after a year or two of them just basically taking all the food out of the forest and killing all the animals that were edible, they didn't have anything to eat anymore. Now, what would happen with native people is we wouldn't eat every single thing, and we would move on before we ended up with no food. So it's not like you eat all the food that's there and then you move. You would stay in one place for a little while, try to leave it better than you found it, and then move on. That wasn't the case with white people when they came from Europe. Now, so then there's this story about how they were starving and there was no more food all of a sudden and they couldn't understand. It's like, well, you ate everything and you killed all the animals. So yeah, for the first Thanksgiving story, the native people that were local were kind of like, man, you guys are like really wrecking the place, but we don't want to see you starve. So they tried to help, right? So that's kind of like the native view of how we see Thanksgiving. And the last probably decade or so, people have really started turning it into more of a celebration of, like, they basically celebrate the creation of Canada, which to some of us is maybe less of a reason to celebrate, right?
Right.
So I was trying to explain to my Jewish friend here. Sorry, go ahead.
No. What I wanted to know is, how does Thanksgiving differ for the white man? And what I mean by that is anyone that really came to this country. Because when I see Thanksgiving, it's people sitting around during harvest season, right? We have right now Sukkot, which we basically do the same thing, back from the old country. We sit down, we eat the food that towards the end of winter we gather. But there is something special about Thanksgiving that is, I think, different for your people than for my people. What I mean by that is, we're sitting here talking about some sort of a cool story about the Indians being invited, to sit with the Pilgrims, having a nice turkey dinner. But there's so much more to this story than just people gathering and saying thanks for the food that we have. There is stories with regards to murdering natives, stories about how tricking natives into thinking that there's going to be peace. Talk to me a little bit about maybe the history of Thanksgiving, and should we really be talking about it?
Well, it's tough because, like, again, like in my family, we celebrate Thanksgiving like you just said. It's a harvest festival, right? People that are close to the land, people that are like farming or have large gardens, this is the time of year when all the work you did over the summer comes to fruition. So, I mean, I joke all the time about how my dad overdoes everything, but I mean, we had miles of hills of potatoes, and we just finally finished getting all our potatoes out of the ground, and it's a lot of work. So yeah, it's a little bit of a celebration that I'm not going to have to dig another friggin' potato for another year. So, and for a lot of native people who do live very close to the land, it is a big deal because you're it's the end of the year. You spent all summer doing all of this work, and it is hard work to live off the land. And now you get to relax with your family and enjoy some of the fruits of your labor. So that there is that aspect. But then there's the secondary thing, and that's like what you said, where it's kind of a bit of a Christian / pagan holiday. And they've turned that into more of a let's celebrate the creation of Canada and all this other stuff. And like you said, for a native person, it's kind of we're sitting here thinking you want us to celebrate the genocide that took place here in North America. Now, I'm not one of those people that likes to misuse words. Everybody that knows me knows one thing I'm really big on is precision of language and not exaggerating, like forming opinions based on facts, right? The simple fact is that there was a genocide in North America. And the simple fact is that there were millions of people that have been murdered since 1492. So that's not something that a lot of Canadians in the mainstream of Canada are comfortable with. But here's the problem. There's a lot of people in Canada that are here in Canada that came from somewhere else. They didn't take part in that. They benefit from it. I mean, let's not sugarcoat it too much. They definitely benefit from it, but they came here often from places that are far worse. They came here from places that have a lot of oppression. They came here from places where you can be murdered just for saying something about the government. So for somebody like that to say, I'm thankful that I'm here in Canada, I don't hold that against them. I don't think to myself, well, you're here because of our genocide, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, I'm willing to put myself in their shoes and say, yeah, I would be thankful if I was in your situation as well. What I would like to see, though, is more people actually speaking up about, the conditions that Native people live in now. I mean, I joke about drinking water all the time, but I can't drink the water out of my tap here. And I mean, Paddle Prairie actually has a good water system, but I live in the middle of nowhere, so we would have to haul our water. So these are the kinds of things that a lot of people don't know. There's a reserve near me that hasn't had clean water in probably 30 years. They have a boil water advisory on an almost monthly basis. That means you can't drink water before boiling it. Like I don't think people really understand what a boil water advisory means. Like,
no,
it means boil the water or you'll die.
No, we're taking definitely things for granted. Here we are, spending time together with our family, eating turkey, right? But at the same time, we're not actually reflecting on what this holiday really means, and also maybe having that discussion at the dinner table. Yes, of course, it became something else where it's like we're thankful for the fact that we can eat, we're thankful that we can be with our family. But when something has so much history surrounded with Thanksgiving, I feel that we need to be able to talk about these conversations. Like, what are we actually doing to make sure that other people are able to eat the same food that we're eating? And you're talking about something as basic as water. I don't think many people around Canada or maybe around the United States know type of conditions that the Indigenous people are living in, not having the ability to have safe water, as you just mentioned. Should it be something that we should bring in when we're talking about Thanksgiving, maybe in schools? That should be a conversation that should be talked about?
Well, it would be nice. I mean, let's be honest. The only time we ever hear about drinking water and the situation on reserves is right before an election, and it's when Trudeau goes on TV and has a little tear in his eye and talks about the horrible conditions that Native Canadians live under, and promises to get them boiling. They'll all have clean water by the end of the year, and most of us just roll our eyes. I mean, me personally, I was spearheading a clean water project. We had actually engaged with some companies for water purification systems. We had some reserves that were on board and ready to go. The government told them, "Oh no, don't work with those guys. We're going to have clean water for you guys by the end of the year." And I still can't believe that they believed them. I told them point blank. I said, you know, the worst things to hear in the world from the government are, "We're the government. We're going to help you," because we know what that means, especially as Native people. So yeah, it can be really frustrating.
We're noticing a lot more. And by the way, I'm wearing orange for a particular reason. I know it's something simple for me to show some sort of support. I know we just had like September 30th, which is a day for reconciliation and, of course, for a day of truth. And last year, I noticed that many, many more people were wearing orange. I kind of wrote that it became a fad, because everyone's like, oh, let's talk about the natives and let's talk about how we can help, and I'll wear orange and, I'll teach my parents. And then around this year, I'm noticing less and less people are wearing orange, less and less people are talking about it. And it just became more of, an appeasing day as opposed to actually a day of action. What can we do as a society, Canadians, to help the Indigenous people, not just to wear orange and say, here, I did my thing, but in terms of taking words into action and really making a difference? Because I'm actually hearing this water situation for the first time, and I don't think I'm someone who is lacking in education, but at the same time, I'm not quite aware of what's happening inside your community.
Well, it's the bottom line is it's out of sight, out of mind, right? There's a reason why most of these reserves are put in very, very hidden away places. Like, they're very remote. Where I live right now, I'm an hour and a half away from the nearest town. So we're in the far north of Alberta, right at the edge of the arboreal forest. So I mean, there's a reason they put us here. It's to be out of sight, out of mind. But as to your question about what can you do, it's actually really simple. Like, ask around, ask in your local communities what kind of Native charities are there, what kind of Native groups are doing work. Like, for instance, in Calgary, people are always asking me, what can I do to help? I mean, there's a group there called Bear Clan Patrol. What they do is they actually walk around downtown and try to make things safe for people. And it's men and women who get together and they engage with the homeless population. They feed people. They have meals where they'll feed people downtown. They try to make things safe at nighttime so a woman doesn't feel scared to walk to her car when she's walking home from work. I mean, those are the kinds of things that each community you'd have to, it really does depend on your community. But I'm positive that there are all of these things in lots of communities. You just have to go out and look. The problem is, and I'll be blunt, my community has one of the very similar problems that the Jewish community has, and it's that we're not very visible, right? So with the Jewish community, a lot of you blend right in. You've been here for a long time. Most people wouldn't know a Jewish person if they looked at them, so they just see another Canadian, right? With a lot of Native people, it's very similar. A lot of us blend right in. So really the only Native people that a lot of people see are the homeless people downtown, or the vagrants, the people that are causing problems. So then they just assume that must be all Native people, which is really unfortunate, because if you look around, we're everywhere. There are Native people all over Canada.
Right, but I don't think it should be one of those things where we're only helping those that are visible. I'm sure there are many organizations out there that are helping, that have a direct connection to a lot of the Indigenous communities around, Ontario. You're in Alberta, but we don't talk about this stuff. It's almost like as if we're just doing rah, rah, rah all the time, and there is no action. Like, okay, fine, I get to buy some sort of clothing that was handmade by someone in Temagami, Ontario, and I feel good about myself. But when we're talking about real action, we're talking about here's an opportunity during Thanksgiving for us to do something for the Indigenous community. Like, around Christmas time, I'm Jewish, so of course I don't celebrate Christmas, but, joining, giving soup to people, and providing clothes. I remember that there was a point in time where I used to collect socks and make coffee and walk around and donate it to people, just give it to homeless people on the streets around Christmas time because of the cold. Is there something that maybe schools should be doing it? And the reason I'm using schools is because that's the forefront of really engaging. And when you're engaging the young go home, they talk to their parents because their parents have a job. They're not really thinking about the Indigenous community. But when it's coming from the home and from school, next thing you know, we can make a big change. Are there any organizations out there that one can join around Thanksgiving, and rather than just have that nice meal, which I think is wonderful, but to actually make something positive for somebody else? And that's really when you're thankful for everything that you have, because you have the ability to change somebody's life.
So it's funny that you mentioned that you're Jewish and the Christmas thing, because I'm gonna say something here that might not be popular, but it's true. The most engaged people in the community in Calgary, the people that helped me the most when I was trying to organize things, was the Jewish community. So when we organized a turkey drive, we actually organized getting turkeys and basically all the supplies for a dinner. We did that for a Christmas on the reserve in Siksika. Now, you would think that that would probably have been mostly Native people that were organizing it. It wasn't. It was actually 5 or 6 of very good friends of mine that happened to be Jewish, and they don't celebrate Christmas. But what did they do? They went to local grocery stores. They got some of them donated turkeys, some donated potatoes, and they literally put together hampers and they took them to the res. Now, they didn't just give them to everybody. What they did was they actually had somebody on the res help them out by finding families that might have been struggling a bit, grandparents that are raising 4 or 5 grandkids, single mothers, people are single fathers, people that are trying to raise a house full of kids. And like lots of people are going to go and try and do toy drives because that's the common one. But they just decided, what would be really nice is if each of these people could have a nice sit down turkey dinner with everybody. And these are the kinds of things. There's no one organization. The problem is that there are no national organizations really that do this kind of work or in the Native community, but there are local ones. So like it depends where you are. But the best thing to do, and I know it's going to sound funny because I'm not a big proponent of Facebook. I think Facebook is freaking terrible in general. But one thing that it does do is it enables people to connect with a lot of different people in a very quick, like a very short amount of time. And you can actually try and find people that are willing to help with this stuff.
Right.
And
But
the thing is, it's a lot of work.
The reason I'm interrupting is I want to know, how come it's not on a national level? Like, you're talking about grassroots, you're talking about local people getting involved, which is wonderful, and I think it's great, and I think every little bit out there. And I don't want people thinking that there are no organizations that are actually helping out. I'm sure there are plenty, but it's not on a national level, and we have an opportunity. I mean, just now we had September 30th, and here's an opportunity. It's kind of around Thanksgiving to maybe have like 10 days of giving back, and maybe on the 10th day we could sit down and celebrate all that we have. But how come we're just getting the tier, we're getting all the right, as you mentioned, the right slogans for voting, but when it comes to actual action on the national level, we're not seeing much change? And I don't want to put the blame on anyone really, but I want to say, how are we able to restart this to maybe make this a national thing of giving back?
It's not easy, and I'll tell you one of the reasons it's not easy is people actually hear the word Indian and they think we're all the same, right? They think, oh, he's Canadian Indian, he's North American Indian. And that's a problem, because the truth of the matter is we are all distinct nations. We have our own languages, our own cultures, our own religions. And so it's like when you have a Cree person who goes into the Blackfoot community, there are challenges there because there are protocols that they have that are different than the protocols that Cree people have. So I noticed it a lot actually when I was doing a lot of work in Siksika. I have an adopted sister who is from Siksika, and Yvonne and I used to joke about it because there were a lot of people that were like, "Oh, that Ryan, he's not a bad guy, eh? But he's Cree, and them Crees." And
Right.
it's funny because like we're all natives, so I mean we all should be sticking together. But the truth of the matter is, there's still animosity there, and it's unfortunate because like you're trying to build things, you're trying to move things forward. And like you said, it would be amazing to have something that was national. Now, what you just stated, though, is something that would be really great to see maybe some young people take that on and say, hey, you know what? Here's what we should do. Like you said, to have a 10 days of giving back to the community. And on the 10th day, we have a big celebration and, and time it for Thanksgiving. Because you know what? Everybody's doing stuff on Thanksgiving anyway.
Right.
And we're not saying don't be thankful. We're saying acknowledge all the crap that happened, but be thankful for what you do have. Because, like, I'm not joking. Today, with my friends over here, we are going to talk about the things we're thankful for, and we're going to, like, the kids, they all know, like, these kids know the history of Canada. So I'm not going to sit here and try and make them feel guilty. I'm just going to say, we need to remember that some terrible things were done in the creation of this country, but we do live in this country. And this country, as for all of its faults, I don't care what anybody says, and I will say this to my dying day, Canada is still the best place in the world to live. Even with Trudeau doing everything he can to wreck it, doesn't matter. This is still the best place in the world to live. I've been all over the world. I've traveled everywhere. I mean, I think at last count, I had 27 countries on my passport. So, I mean, I've been all over the damn place. And I've seen places like Nicaragua where they murder Indigenous people just for talking about Indigenous rights. I've seen places in Eastern Europe where they will just shoot you. So, I mean, you have to understand that this is not a bad place to live. And yeah, we've got some trouble here, but at the end of the day, we should be thankful for what we have, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to make things better.
On the same topic, we are right now trying to not just retell the story about history, but we're trying to rewrite history. It's happening, with my Indigenous story, right? I mean, the same thing. But the one thing I wanted to ask you, really, we have all these statues that are coming down and name changing, and I think we're putting the focus on the wrong things. This is at least what it seems like to me. Now, clearly having you on the show is much, much better, and I want to hear your opinions. But I don't see, a real reason to bring down a statue and to change names. I really feel like, no, we should acknowledge what had happened, say that there's imperfections that are happening, talk about the truth that happened in history, and say, look, John A. Macdonald is the first Prime Minister of Canada, and yes, he has blood on his hands, like many, many leaders throughout history. In almost every history around the world, there's always somebody who has blood on their hands. We shouldn't completely ignore it, but we should be able to have dialogue about it. But today, we're sort of reaching this point where we want to shut people up and change things, as opposed to really delving into making a difference, as opposed to just shutting somebody up. How do you feel about this? And that's also the purpose of the show.
Yeah, no, 100%. Look, I know that I'm in a minority here, because when you talk to a lot of Native people, the problem is a lot of us, you either have the average grassroots Native person who's pretty socially conservative, they're conservative people, they're traditionalists, right? All of us are, really. Now, then you have the activist people, and they're kind of a little bit more on the left side of things, and they're usually pretty woke, like they have to talk about their social justice and progressiveness and all that nonsense. Now, the difference is that they're the ones that want to, like, shut everybody up. They don't really like anybody else having an opinion. And if you express anything that's not in complete lockstep with them, they will attack you. And I've seen it myself. Like, so when I started talking about Israel, they freaked out. They were like, oh my God, you're not allowed to say that. And I'm like, why not? They're like, we can't have that opinion. I was like, why not? I've done the research. Unlike you, I've actually been there. So why would you try to lecture me? But here's the thing, like what you just said, and I think this is really simple. You you don't change things when you deny that they ever happened. And by tearing down statues and renaming things, you're basically denying it happened, because you're taking that completely out. You're changing history. You're wiping it away. It's like taking the Indian off the picture of the land of Lake's butter. And we always joke about it. Okay, first they stole the land, now they took the woman's picture off. Now there's no Indian in the land either. So it's like, to us, it's just ridiculous. Why would you do that? It doesn't make any sense. Like, they changed the name of the Washington Redskins. They never talked to very many Indians about that. That was mostly white liberal progressives that were freaking out. Most of the Native people that I live with here in Paddle Prairie, I know lots of Redskins fans here. You look on my wall back there, there's a Redskins hat. Why? Because I grew up watching the Redskins, and we always thought, hey, there's no pictures of Indians in common culture. In pop culture, there's almost never like, when's the last time you saw a movie with an Indian hero that wasn't a movie specifically about Indians?
Well,
like, we're just not in pop culture.
Well, that's the
right?
thing. I mean, I mean, it's much bigger than just, of course, the Indians. It's really about changing history as a whole. Like, for example, when I was a kid, I grew up on Westerns because my dad really liked the Duke. My dad really liked Clint Eastwood. My
Mine
dad
too.
was like a big fan. So, of course, I watch what my dad watches and I watch the Westerns. And I always wanted to be the Indian, like I always felt that the cowboy has a gun and the Indian has. And then all of a sudden, it's like, well, you can't even dress up as that. You can't. And I'm like, why not? Is it not real? No, it's offending. Offending who?
Yeah.
I mean, what am I trying to go out there to try and offend someone? Okay, I get it. I'm not going to paint my face red, and I don't think I've ever had the idea of doing that to begin with. But like, it's becoming much bigger, where cancel culture has sort of taken over, and you have to follow one particular agenda, and the agenda will change based on particular people who are in charge, who are moving that,
Oh yeah.
moving the conversation to where they want to get to. So
Well,
as
Ron, no,
yeah,
like what I call those people, seriously, like I've been calling this out for a long time now. I call them outrage farmers, because these are the people who they got to manufacture outrage no matter what, right? So like, I just want to bring it back to, the cancel culture. I like what you'd asked me. The bottom line is this: they don't like something, so they don't think anybody should like it. Now, the problem is they never really talk to the people that they're supposedly advocating on behalf of. So you end up with where there was at least a little bit of representation of Native people in pop culture. And this is the bottom line. Sports teams, especially football teams, they try to name their teams after something that sounds tough, something that sounds badass,
right,
something that like instills like a sense of pride in the local population.
right,
Now, the thing is with the Washington Redskins, they had a logo that was very stoic and kind of looked badass. So if you're an Indian kid and you see that logo, you don't think to yourself, "Oh, that's appropriation. It's got a feather in his hair." You think that logo is badass. And if the team is really good, you get a little sense of pride that's associated with that. It's like the team called the Redskins is actually pretty badass. I can associate with that. Now, by the same token, I'm not going to make any excuses for the Cleveland Indians. You look at the Cleveland Indians mascot, that Chief Wahoo with the buck teeth, and he's cartoony.
right.
There's nobody in the Native community that liked Cleveland Indian shit. I've never seen a Native person, be like, "Oh, I like that buck tooth Chief Wahoo." It's like, no, that's just not a thing. But when they start doing that and they start advocating on our behalf, they usually they ignore us because we're like, wait a second, no, we're not that offended. But what they'll do is they'll find a few people who probably didn't even watch football or play football, and they're Native, and they think, oh, cultural appropriation is so horrible. And then all of a sudden you have this whole atmosphere where my friend's little girl, who thinks that I'm God, like this kid really loves me. She's in Israel, actually, a good friend of mine. She thought I was awesome. She just loves me. She wanted to dress up like an Indian for Halloween, and then for Purim, which the Jewish holiday where they dress up. Well, I don't have to explain that to you, you know that, but some of the audience might not. But anyway, so my buddy sent me a picture of her dressed up like an Indian, and without even hearing the backstory, I just sent him back a text saying, LOL, that's cute. And then he said, yeah, she says to me, I wanted to be an Indian like Uncle Ryan. He's awesome, right? So am I supposed to be offended that a little girl wanted to dress up like an Indian so she could feel a little closer to me because she likes me? Like, in what kind of world would I be offended by that? Like,
but that's the thing. We're having dialogue about it, and that's the problem today. Is that we're not allowed to discuss. We're not allowed to have these opinions that may differ from somebody else. And I may be advocating the same thing that somebody else is advocating, but I'm looking at it from a different perspective. I don't want to get into everything that's wrong with this world, because clearly that's what we're going to have many episodes to talk about. But I want to finish off with saying Thanksgiving is an opportunity. I think that it's not just an opportunity for us to be thankful, but it's an opportunity to really make a positive change in our communities here in Canada. And I wish that, maybe after the podcast, maybe those that are listening can actually listen to this and say, we want a change. We want action. We do not just want people talking about it and, again, wearing a shirt and denying people of having opinions, but actually make a positive change. Now, you were mentioning something before about the different types of natives. And of course, as a Jewish person, we have many people, right? I mean, a Jewish person from Morocco, and a Jewish person from Iran, and a Jewish person from Russia. We're all Jews, but we definitely have different ideas of what is right and what is wrong. As a Jew, our cultures dictate sort of how we live, but there is sort of this like one body where we know that as long as it's helping the Jewish people, we are for it. Is there such a thing within your community where you guys can come together and say, look, there's something positive happening here, and it's not just for this community or that community. Let's put everything aside and work together for ourselves? Because really it has to come from, in my opinion, from the Indigenous community to want to evoke change, and not just having the white man say what change should happen.
Well, see, here's the thing. There's a slight difference here, because with Jews, you're all still Jews, so you have that common core culture, right? You have that core Jewish identity that's the same for a Jew. Doesn't matter if he's Ashkenazi from Eastern Europe, doesn't matter if he's Mizrahi from the Middle East or Sephardi from Spain. None of that matters, because you still have that core culture. Why? Because Jews all came from the land of Israel. You have that core, that common beginning that gives you everything that you have in common, right? So all the things that you do have in common, you can use those as a uniting factors, that core Jewish identity. The problem with Native people is that our core identities aren't the same. You have Native people that have like very disparate beliefs. You have some natives that are actually not monotheistic. You have some natives that are pantheistic. You have some that are polytheistic, so multiple gods. You have people like mine that believe that we're all just a part of the creator. I mean, you have this huge disparity. Like, it's massive. So it's more like comparing us to Europe, where you look at Europe and there's all these different nationalities. So you have, English, and English are very different from French, and you have French that are very different from Spanish, and Spanish that are very different from German.
Right.
That's more akin to what we're dealing with. And the problem is, with all of these different languages, cultures, and modes of spirituality, is that we are extremely different people. Now, the only similarity we have is that everybody calls us Indians. So we joke about that, right? Like, that's really the only commonality we have, is that to white Canadians, we're all just Indians. So maybe we could use that as a uniting factor. But leaders of Native people, right from the very beginning, like you go back to people like Sitting Bull. Sitting Bull tried really hard to unite Native people. Chief Joseph Brant, Quanah Parker. In Canada, we had what's his name, Poundmaker, and what's his the Blackfoot chief. They tried to put their reserves side by side, but the Canadian government said, "Oh no, we don't want the Cree and the Blackfoot to be side by side, because they might unite against us." So they actually literally separated us, even though our territories overlapped. So I mean, I see where you're coming from, and it's coming from a good place. But the truth of the matter is, the only way that this stuff will ever work is if we take the time to fix our communities on a community level, and then try to work towards a national level. Unfortunately for us, I don't think we have those core commonalities, other than the fact that, like a shared oppression and a shared racism against us, that's not enough to unite us. We need something more.
But
so unfortunately,
and again, I'm coming from a different place, but my suggestion is, it doesn't really matter like who we're helping. It's about giving back, and it's about like getting water systems in places that don't have clean water, and it's really about fixing these communities, and maybe, as I said, like the 10 days, just as an idea of rebuilding and providing opportunities.
100%. Ron, you're preaching to the choir. Yeah. I'm Cree, and most of my advocacy work has been done on the behalf of other Indigenous peoples. So I mean, like, when I lived in Calgary, I did a ton of work in the Blackfoot community. Why? Because they were the community where I was living. I was living in southern Alberta, right? I'm home now. I'm living up north, so the stuff that I'm working on here now is for people up here. But I see where you're coming from. But my concern is, we need to start small. My own belief, because when we try to do stuff too big, we take on too much. It's kind of like that old saying: how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? Yeah. Because otherwise, you look at the elephant, and the job is just too big. It's too much.
Right.
So we don't want to scare people away, but at the same time, like you said, we don't want to be standing still doing nothing. So I think our best bet, in all honesty, is to start motivating people, start educating people. Do what you said. Start with young people, because a lot of older people, we're set in our ways. We already believe what we believe. It's really
Right.
difficult. But if we can start with young people and say, like you just said, what's important to you? Talk to them. Say, hey, in your community, there are Native people. So would you like to talk to one? Would you like to hear what they think about things? You and I are a case in point, right?
Right.
Like you're a Middle Eastern, like you're a Jewish dude from the Middle East. I'm a native person from Northern Alberta. Really, it should be very difficult for us to talk, but instead we find the commonalities with each other. We sit and we actually spend the time in dialogue. I listen to you, you listen to me, and instead of talking past each other and just waiting for our turn to talk, we actually listen. So hopefully, if other people see those kinds of things, and hopefully if they see the podcast, they'll understand. They're like, wait a second, like there's a lot that can be done if you're just willing to listen.
And I'm happy that we're opening the floor to having people talk about making the change, and it can't just start with us too. Of course, there's a lot of people that can get involved, but I think it's definitely something to talk about because, as I said, for me, it's mostly about action. I hear a lot of people talking and yapping, but when it comes down to it, no one's really doing much about it. So I'm really hoping that there's going to be a positive change, something that actually affects everyone. This is not a Cree, Blackfoot, Jew. It's everyone. Today is International Mental Health Day. So October 10th is always a special day for me, and it's funny because I get excited about this day, and it's really weird because for many years I never wanted to talk about my own mental health. Now I'm not one of those people that am very very open about it. But I, struggle with depression. I think like every person, living in around the world in this situation, especially 2020, a lot of people, felt lonely and needed that extra support. I think that many people are suffering in silence. And so the reason I'm smiling when I'm talking about it, because we're finally can talk about it and move forward and help those that are in need. But the problem that I'm having with mental health is that today everybody's using mental health as an excuse for things that could be like, hey, I'm just lazy, or I don't feel like doing something, so mental health, or I'm feeling anxious right now, so it's mental health. And I feel like if we're going to continue going in that route where we use mental health as opposed to really when it's real mental health issues, it's just gonna disappear. People are not gonna give it as much thought or support for those who are really in need. What are your thoughts about that?
It's funny you said that, because those are my exact thoughts. It's like the boy that cried wolf, right? So like, are there people who genuinely struggle with mental health issues? Absolutely. I see it in my community all the time. I see it in your community. I mean, people that are coming from a traumatized people are going to have mental health issues. That's just a given. But when I go on Twitter and I see their Twitter bio, and in their Twitter bio, they have 15 different kinds of mental illness, and then they talk about, like, that's their identity. They're like, I have ADHD, I have oppositional defiance disorder, I have all this stuff, and I'm an idiot. Like, it's like,
Right.
no, you know what? I don't care about that stuff. And what it does is it actually it makes it so that people will literally look at that, roll their eyes, and be like, oh, great, we're going to listen to this nonsense. When what we should be doing is we should be saying, there are people that are struggling with depression, especially, this post pandemic, all the COVID idiocy that was going on. Yeah, there's kids that didn't get to play sports. They didn't get to hang out with their friends for like a year. I couldn't imagine being in the prime of my football career and being told, no, you can't play football for a year, and you can't hang out with your team, and you can't practice, and you can't go hang out with your friends. I couldn't imagine being a young person dealing with that. And instead of us being able to talk about that, now we have to talk about all this other stuff. And it's kind of really, it's disappointing, because we're leaving important subjects on the table so that we can talk about nonsense. And I know that it's going to make a lot of people angry when they hear me say this. I don't really care, to be honest. I want to talk about real problems. I don't want to talk about manufactured nonsense. So, like, when somebody comes to me and says, all this stuff about trans people, for instance, right? Yeah, you know what? I know some trans people, and I think it's sad. I think they're struggling and they have mental issues and they have a really high incidence of suicide rates in their community. And at the same time, I also hear these people come up to them and say stuff like, well, I'm non-binary. And I'm like, okay, that just sounds made up to me. It's like, okay, like you're coming and saying that your problem now with this trans person is that, they want to be, they're a woman that wants to be a man or a man that wants to be a woman, or that's how they feel in their head. And I can understand that because it's, everybody struggles with something. But then when you come
Right.
up to me and say, well, I'm neither man nor woman, and so that's my struggle, it's kind of like, okay, that just seems really manufactured. Like, I'm sorry, but
Well, a
yeah,
lot of
I
things
know
in our
it's
society
not
are
popular.
going that route, right? A lot of things in our society are going that route where, there
Well,
are
feelings.
actual issues, and then there are those that are just trying to, I call them the selfies, right? Like, meaning like it's about me. Here's my chance
Yep.
to talk about my connection to it and what I support. And
Yeah.
really, like, you're taking away from people who are actually struggling. Those that are sitting there talking about, I call it alphabet. I call it the alphabet soup of who I am, right?
Yeah.
They're so focused on the alphabet as opposed to focusing on the real issues. Maybe educating people about the struggles that these people are going through, rather than sitting there and judging someone and you use the wrong word to explain. Not only that, all these
Yeah.
things are all new and it's just coming out of nowhere. It's coming, like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
yesterday's word is not today's word and not going to be tomorrow's word. So just learn.
Yeah.
So the focus is
Yeah.
really in the wrong place. And I feel like the reason I'm bringing it up around the mental health issue is because I suffered, and when I hear people, talking about mental health, and they're talking, dude, that's not mental health. And I don't want to take that away from them, but you just want the attention. You just want people to feel,
Yeah.
to feel for you because this is the new fad. And I hate
Yeah.
the fact
100%.
that it's actually becoming a mental health fad as opposed to it being something real where people are actually suffering.
Oh, dude. So like, okay. So I tutor, right? I do some history tutoring, and I'm helping some people that are homeschooling their kids. When I was growing up, I went to a school where, I'll just be honest, it was a Catholic school. And the nuns, they had this thing about left-handed. Being left-handed was not good. It wasn't, it's
Right.
actually kind of funny when you look at it now, because I mean, I know I'm dating myself because I'm in my 40s now, but it's kind of funny when you think about somebody saying, being left-handed means, that's the devil. So then they would force us to use our right hands. But the funny part was, for me, I was ambidextrous, so I could use either hand with the same kind of skill. So the teachers would get really upset with me because I would use my left hand sometimes, and then I would switch over to my right hand, and it was the same thing. And they couldn't tell when I was doing it. So what I noticed, though, was that when I was growing up, they would make these, like, if you didn't pay good attention, because I was a kid, normal kid. I didn't like to sit still. I didn't like to sit in class. Now they would say I have attention deficit disorder. Reality, I just didn't like to sit still. Now they would give me a whole bunch of pills and say, "Oh, this is a mental health thing. Here's some, what do they call it? Ritalin." They'll give me some kind of
Yeah.
pill and
Yeah.
expect me to sit still and be a zombie. It's like, and then we wonder why all these kids are suddenly, we have this like epidemic of mental illnesses. It's like, well, you're manufacturing it. Like, let kids be kids, and then maybe you don't have to worry so much. Like you were just saying, like during the pandemic and everything, maybe if we didn't act so crazy about certain things, then we wouldn't be pushing this on our kids. Maybe if our communities learned how to deal with trauma rather than pushing it further down the line,
Amazing.
like, I really see this a lot in the Jewish and the Native community, is, like, you have kids or children of, I guess you would call it grandchildren now, grandchildren of people that were in the Holocaust, and you have like grandchildren of people that went through residential schools, these people that went through some really traumatic stuff. And look, I'm not playing oppression Olympics here, I'm literally just talking from the heart about, horrible things. They go through these horrible things, and then the first generation, they really bear the brunt of it. But then those people have kids, and now those people are passing on trauma to those kids. And then everyone's all in shock when there's actual mental illness, when there's actual people that are suffering from depression, people that are suffering from, real ADHD. Like, there's a big difference between I can't sit still and watch a movie, because I can't sit and watch a movie. I have to be reading my book or pissing around on Facebook. I
Right.
can't just sit and watch a movie. I'm just not built that way.
Right.
There's a big difference between that and a child who literally cannot focus for longer than 5 seconds, right? Like we are in a generation now where even this is going to be a long video. So unless you're actually interested in the stuff we're talking about, it's going to be kind of tough for some people to watch. Why? Because we are the generation of the 1 minute soundbite,
Right.
right? So if we were to turn that into, oh no, that's because of mental illness, bullshit. There's actual people dealing with real mental illness. Your inability to watch a video longer than 2 minutes is not mental illness. It's just you're not capable of it. That's all there is to it.
Do you feel that this is a problem that is a today problem? What I mean by that, today, you know, every time there's an issue, here's a pill for that. Today, every time there is, you know, like some sort of problem, we want to throw in some sort of a letter to say this is what you belong to. We have to place you somewhere. Do you believe if we had the same situation, let's just say 30 years ago, we'd actually be tackling the issues, understanding them, and coming up with a strategy to fix it rather than just, or at least work towards fixing it rather than just the quick fix? Because I feel, just like you said, the minute snippet of information that people are used to hearing, everybody wants the quick fix today. You know, the internet's not working, you know, it's like the end of the world, right? Like we want everything now. So do you think that it's going to get worse through time, or is this just something that it's momentary?
I think if we don't do something to nip this in the bud, it's only going to get worse. I mean, I remember even when it was like we used to joke about you had to do everything within 3 minutes. Like if you didn't do it in 3 minutes, you're going to lose your audience. Now it's down to a minute. I mean, you go on YouTube and they have these things called reels now. So if you can't even watch the 5 minute YouTube video, you want to watch the 35-second YouTube reel of it. Like they break everything down into tiny sound bites that are, you know, and people will sit and watch those tiny sound bites for 2 or 3 hours, but they can't watch a 5 minute YouTube video. Like this is, and one thing I blame, and people laugh at me when I say this because I am from the video game generation. My generation is the generation that got the Atari 2600. We are the first people to play, you know, Pong on a TV. Part of the problem is that my generation, we didn't have that attitude of, well, it's not going well, I'll just reset and start over. The next generation that played video games, that's how they started doing things. And so when you have that ability to just instantly hit reset and start over with no problem, no penalty, all of a sudden you start developing those kind of habits in the rest of your life. So if that's your habit, I mean, that's what you're going to do. It's like, oh, things aren't going well for me. I'm hitting reset. I can start over. It's not a big deal. Whereas my generation would be like, well, play it out, see what happens. Because you know what? Sometimes I'm going to be challenged. Sometimes I'm going to have bad things happen to me and I got to overcome those challenges.
So I want to know, how do we overcome this? How do we get out? How do we get out of this situation that we're in? Because we are used to getting news reports, you know, real information, history lessons in a second. Like, oh, let's do the history of the Middle East in 60 seconds. Let's go. And we think, and then we come out and we're like experts in the issue because we watched some guy that we don't know anything about him from wherever he's from, giving me a 60-second video, and now I can go out and talk about it. So, I mean, I just don't see a way for a positive change. I don't see how people are going to get more and more educated. I feel like they're going to become dumber and dumber because they don't know the full story. And at one point, you have to know the full story. You can't just read the back of the book and say, I know everything that's in there.
So here's a case in point. Recently, like a lot of people watch Joe Rogan's podcast, right? And the reason they watch Joe Rogan's podcast is because he does a pretty good job of getting people from all over the spectrum to talk about all kinds of things. And some of the stuff they talk about is a little out there, you know, like ancient aliens and, you know, dinosaur stuff. And, you know, they talk about a lot of stuff, but every now and then he has on somebody that talks about politics. Now, the other day, he had Roger Waters come on his podcast. And this actually disappointed me about Rogan, because one thing I don't like about him is that when he has people on his show, if he really likes them, he doesn't push back. Right? Like if he doesn't like them or there's a little bit of animosity, he's actually a much better host because he'll challenge them on the things they say, and he'll get his buddy there, Jamie or whatever his name, to look
Right.
up stuff. If they say something that's even sounds a little bit hinky, he'll call it out and be like, hey, let's look that up, right? He doesn't do that with people like Roger Waters. Now, Roger Waters is on there and he's saying all kinds of ridiculous nonsense about Israel. And instead of challenging him, he literally sat there and he was like nodding and saying, "Oh yeah, yeah, no, that's horrible. Oh boy." And so his viewers are watching this and they must be thinking that either Joe agrees with this or this guy must be right because he's not challenging him. Now Waters goes into this story where he's talking about how he was doing a concert in Israel, and this is one of his aha moments when he realized how terrible Israelis are and how bad Israel is, because he did his songs and everybody was cheering and it was loud and everybody's yeah, it's so awesome, Pink Floyd. And then he said, you're the generation that's going to have to make peace with the Palestinians and you're going to have to listen to them. And now on the Rogan thing, he says, and then it was silence. And I was so disappointed. And it was like a steel wall came down and nobody cheered. It was silence in the arena. And then it turns out somebody took the time, because they saw that and was like, wait a minute, I was there. And that's not what happened. That's not even close to what happened. So they went and they found a recording of it. And in the recording, you can hear. And the funny part is the part that Waters talks about where he says, it's your generation that's going to have to make peace. Yeah. You know what? He remembered that perfectly. He remembered almost verbatim what he said. The part that he didn't remember so well was that it wasn't silent at all. When he said that stuff, they were cheering. And not just a little bit. It's not like it was like a few people. It was the entire crowd cheering and agreeing with him that it was going to be their generation to make peace.
Yeah.
But he goes on Joe Rogan and he starts talking about how it was like a steel wall and it was silence and they didn't want peace, and you talk about it with them and they just hate. And so, like, if I'm a dude that doesn't know any better, I'm watching this, and I say I'm a Joe Rogan fan. I don't even really care about Roger Waters, but I'm watching this and I'm like, wow, I can't believe how terrible those Israelis are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So they don't
Right?
understand the damage that they're
Yeah.
doing by not challenging.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk a little bit about that because this is, again, I'm a big Joe Rogan fan, so it's a little hard for me to really bring the guy down, but I sort of see this point. Joe Rogan is a fan of Roger Waters, a fan of Pink Floyd. So he's not there to talk about politics with him. He's there to talk about music. He wants to really get to know him. Of course, for us, Roger Waters is politics. Like, I'm the biggest Pink Floyd fan you'd ever meet. The problem is I would never pay money knowing what Roger Waters says clearly about Israel. And there's a whole story I'm probably going to get into. But Joe Rogan is seeing more of a fan. I just feel, and I think we said this when we talked off screen, that he has some sort of responsibility to maybe go back and talk about the interviews that he's had in the past and say, look, I was wrong here for not challenging because I am a fan and I didn't want to go that route and I wasn't really agreeing with it. I was just kind of letting it go because I don't have enough information. And I feel that this is where these podcasts are lacking. They're lacking in the ability to really take action for the stuff that they're saying that is wrong, or for supporting something that is wrong. As opposed to if you're on national television and there's big money behind it, if you said anything that's wrong or somebody even feels that you said something is wrong, you'd have to apologize. Where with this podcast, he has not said anything about it. The Roger Waters story actually is pretty interesting because I've heard many versions of it from Roger Waters. And what he said was that he was in Tel Aviv when he did the show. And I'm thinking to myself, Tel Aviv, the most liberal city in the Middle East, where maybe half of the population was Arab who came to listen to him. And now he's doing shows in Gaza, right? Or goes to these places. I'm thinking, if he would have said the same thing to them, what would be the response? But he wouldn't dare ask that question there about making peace with the Israelis or Jews. And that's where the problem lies. And you know what? Okay, so the audience was quiet. These are people coming to see a concert. They don't want to hear politics. When I go out to see Pearl Jam, I remember back in the day, he used to talk about Bush. I would be like, please stop. Please stop. I love your music. I don't want to hear you bashing Bush. I'm not a Bush fan, but don't bring this on to me, and I would remain silent. That doesn't mean that I'm anti something. So the point of what I'm trying to say is, number one, Joe Rogan does need to take responsibility, not just him, but many people like him, because it is dangerous so many people are listening to him. But so there needs to be some sort of, looking back and trying to fix an error. I think maybe it could be a small segment at the beginning of every show with regards to something that was in the past. That's number one. But number two, we're providing a stage for these types of people. Like we're talked before about cancel culture. We talked before about how, so many people are being shut down for their opinions if they don't follow a particular agenda. What's Roger Waters' agenda? I mean, he's a known anti-Semite. I mean, forget anti-Israel. Forget he's a known anti-Semite, and yet no one is doing anything. And who are the people that are in the cancel culture world? Those same Jews. I mean, again, I'm talking about my own people. I understand it. Why is he not being challenged? Why are people not going after him to try and bring him down? Why are we not doing more about, when people are actually being racist towards someone, calling racism when it's really racist, as opposed to somebody used the N-word, let's go back and find out, whether he said the full word or did he have an A at the end or whether he meant it as a friend. When we know that something is real, like the voice of Roger Waters and his anti-Semitism, we don't do anything about it. So my real question is, how come the world isn't coming in at going at Roger Waters to try and bring him down and say, don't spew this anti-Semitic stuff? Why aren't we doing anything about that?
Yeah. Well, that's, okay, it goes right back to, like, you hit the nail on the head when you're talking about Rogan, because Rogan's a fan, right? But the problem is they didn't spend a whole lot of time talking about the music. They spent almost the whole time talking about politics, and I would say probably about 3/4 of it talking about Israel.
Because
talked a little bit about the Ukraine, talked a little bit about Russia, but let's be honest, he was there to bash Israel. That's what he does.
Well, that's what Roger Waters is there for, and that's
exactly.
the thing.
Yeah,
we need to understand when we're bringing someone on the show, what is their agenda? I mean, everybody knows Pink Floyd. What does he need to talk about? The music. Yeah, great music. But yes, he has an agenda, and I think that Jamie or whoever was there who was doing the research should have known that this person is a known anti-Semite.
That's what he's going to talk about.
Right, absolutely. Not only that, when you come on a show, when you talk about what's happening in Ukraine, real stuff, real things, not the Israel stuff that he's talking about. As I said, he wouldn't dare say the same thing and accept the same answer in Gaza, saying, let's make peace with the Jews. He wouldn't do that. Right? It's because he comes in with his own personal opinions on something, and he spews it not just on Joe Rogan, but everywhere. But he's not being challenged by anyone. Why is that? How come these people are not going after known anti-Semites?
Because it's so much harder. Ron, it's so much. Look, it's so much more difficult to challenge anti-Semites. Because if you say anything that is like critical of Islam. Recently, we just had a Canadian politician who everybody was freaking out at because he made a comment that Islam is a militaristic ideology. And somebody turned that into that's an anti-Islamic tirade, and that's horrible. I can't believe he said that. And it's like, why? It's the truth. Everybody knows that Islam was spread through the sword. That's literally how Islam spread. It's called the Muslim conquest in the 7th century. Anyone can Google that. But the problem is, if you say that, they can use one of their words to shut you down, and they use cancel culture. You're Islamophobic. It's like, no, I just looked at the evidence, and that's what I saw. Now, the problem is and I've always maintained this, and I'll go to my grave saying this, the problem we have with anti-Semitism is that it's irrational. So when you have an irrational fear of something, you can't rationalize it. It doesn't make sense. You can't rationalize the irrational. It doesn't work. So we try to base everything on facts and information, but how do I have a real conversation with someone when their facts and information are YouTube videos? Like, this is where we're going to come into a real problem in the next couple of years, because people think that Wikipedia is a good source. They think that their 30-second YouTube video on the history of the Middle East qualifies them as a subject matter specialist. You and I both know there's a lot of context here. There's a lot of stuff that, I mean, I've been studying the Middle East and the history of the world, to be honest, for decades. And there's lots of stuff I don't know. Every now and then someone will actually tell me something and I had no idea.
Right.
So I mean, like, and I'm somebody that takes pride in being very, informed about this stuff. So you get a guy like Roger Waters. He goes on this show and all he does is spout nonsense the entire time. Same thing with one of Rogan's other guests, Abby Martin. She goes on there and talks about how Israel arrests people for social media posts and how they shoot Palestinian women in the genitals. Like, just some of the most idiotic stuff. And anybody with like, if you have a higher IQ than 100, you know that's nonsense. But the problem is, if you want to believe that, you believe it.
Well, this is really why we have a show. I mean, the whole idea of be offended is because a lot of people are offended over the wrong things, and they don't want to have the dialogue. They don't want to talk about it. They just want to say, "I'm offended," and call it a day. And you should respect it. But yes, you know what? You can be offended. It's okay. Be offended. No problem. You're offended by the truth. That's up to you. That's fine. We should be able to ignore these people. I want to talk a little bit about what is our goal on the show and what we're here to do. So I know what I'm here to do. I want to talk a little bit about, I want to ask you, why do you feel we need to have a podcast like Be Offended, and what should people be looking for if they want to continue to tune in to this nice podcast?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that you need to have dialogue. Without dialogue, you can't have contextual or critical thinking. And part of the problem is right now that we have people that are willing to do the critical thinking, but they don't think contextually. And then we have people that think contextually, but they don't think critically. We need to have a combination of those things. We need to have the ability to challenge things. I'm a big fan of challenging orthodoxies, and I'll give you one quick example. I kind of came up in the native rights, indigenous rights kind of world where everybody has a certain set of opinions, right? All the people that do native rights advocacy, they're almost all very, very left in the spectrum. I was pretty lefty myself. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I wouldn't say that I was like a hardcore leftist, but I was definitely left of center. But then when I started talking about Israel, I wasn't approaching it from like a nationalist kind of thing. I was approaching it from a tribalist kind of perspective. And as an indigenous person, I saw this other group of indigenous people who managed to achieve like self-determination on their own ancestral land, which is the goal of every native rights movement.
Right.
But I was told that no, these people are, basically, I'll give you the rundown. They're white colonizers from Europe. They stole the native Palestinians' land. And so I remember thinking to myself, wait a second, the Palestinians self-identify as Arabs. They speak Arabic. They follow Islam almost exclusively. There's very, very few Palestinian Christians anymore. They're all gone now. Very few, I think like 2% or something ridiculous. So I'm supposed to now believe that people that came from somewhere else imposed their foreign language, imposed their foreign religion, imposed their foreign culture on the natives. I'm supposed to believe somehow that they're actually indigenous, but the people who were there before them and had a language that's tied to the land, had a religious perspective that is specifically tied to that ancestral land. I'm supposed to believe that they're foreign colonizers from Europe. So I can think for myself. And some of us Indians can read books. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, this is sheer and utter nonsense. But then when I started challenging it, I'm challenging a 40-year entrenched narrative. This narrative's been entrenched in the Native community since the 1960s. Right. In the 1960s, for some reason, they decided that, the Palestinians doing terrorism was a better group to kind of ally with than the group of people who rebuilt their ancestral land and made the desert bloom. For some stupid reason, a lot of natives in my community, they saw the romantic nonsense of the Arabs and thought that their struggle was the same as ours, when it's anything but the same. So
it's a David and Goliath, right? It's looking for the David in the story. And now Israel is, a country, and these people are trying to take back what belongs to them. So it's romanticizing it.
Think about how absolutely ridiculous that is. That the David and Goliath story, which is literally David, the Jewish munchkin, the Jewish tiny guy, fighting Goliath, the Palestinian, the Philistine giant.
Yeah.
Now they've inverted that whole story to make you the giant and them the poor picked on little guy. And it's like, as a native person, I'm watching this and I'm like, this is disgusting. Like they're stealing these people's story, and it's horrible. So I decided at that point, you know what? I've spent my whole life challenging orthodoxies. I've spent my whole life saying I don't think that that's right, and if I don't think that that's right, I'm going to educate myself so that I have the ability to challenge that. I don't want to be the guy to say that's wrong, and then when they say why, then I'm just like, I don't know.
Right.
I want to be the guy that when they say that's wrong, I can say, well, for beginners to start with, and then I can just go into it. Because I'm going to be blunt, I've never lost a debate. And I've had debates with a lot of people. I've had debates with people like Noam Chomsky, and I wish that would have been televised, but he had me removed from one of his speaking engagements at the University of Alberta because I came right out and challenged him when he said the indigenous Palestinians. I've talked, I've literally made Stephen Salaita cry. I had Yves Engler. We had a debate, which really consisted of me providing facts and context and talking about Israel, and him just repeating the same nonsense talking points from his little chart that he has. And like, I've had these debates, and these people can never debate me. And these are people with like PhDs and master's degrees. I had a debate with a Jewish studies professor who literally told me that Jews came from Poland. This is a guy with a master's in Jewish studies telling me that Jews came from Poland.
Right.
So I said, do you say next year in Krakow? Is that how that works?
Definitely
He didn't
not.
like that. So
Right.
yeah. So, like, I want to make sure that I am educated enough that they can't baffle me with bullshit. I'm not a mushroom. You don't stick me in a room and cover me with bullshit and leave me alone. I'm going to sit and I'm going to read and I'm going to talk to people. I'm going to travel and I'm going to form my opinions based on those things. I'm not going to make my opinions based on a 30-second YouTube video or because every other Indian activist has a tattoo. I don't give a shit about that stuff. I want people to make their opinions based on intelligence. I want them to make it based on getting to know as much as they possibly can before they start talking.
But here's the issue, if I may say so. I mean, but we're talking to a society right now that's unwilling to listen to the conversation, that's unwilling to debate, that's unwilling to argue, that only wants to take one side or wants to belong to some sort of a party, wants to be liked, wants to enjoy the fad, wants to always be happy, wants to celebrate Thanksgiving and not worry about what really happened, the real stories behind it. Life is grand. So how are we going to make that change with this, podcast that we're doing when people that really need to change are unwilling to listen?
So here's the thing. Everybody, I had some friends that actually told me, Ryan, you really like to rock the boat. That's not true. I'm not going to rock the boat. I'm going to tip that son of a bitch over and I'm going to build a new fucking boat. And that's what we're going to do with this. We're not just going to rock the boat. We're not just going to make waves. We're going to tell people. And we're going to tell them in no uncertain terms. That's stupid. And if you say something stupid, I'm going to challenge you. And I'm opening this up right now. Anybody that's watching this that feels like they should come on here and try to argue with us about some of the things that we're going to say, I really want you to do that. And I'm going to place priority on us having guests that disagree with us. I want the people that disagree with us, if you feel so strongly that we're wrong, come on here and tell us how we're wrong. Be polite. Don't be an asshat, because if you're going to be an asshat, I guarantee you I can be the bigger asshat. That's not what this is about. This will be about you have your chance to say your piece. We'll say our piece, and we'll let the good ideas beat the bad ideas. How about that? The best way to beat bad ideas is with good ideas. So come on here, say whatever you got to say, and I guarantee you, Ron and I will have more than an ample opportunity to pick it apart. But we will give you your space to say whatever you want. But I'm going to tell you this, you're not going to like the result.
Ryan, this is why I'm excited about this show. This is why I'm excited to start this thing off, because we're not afraid to even be wrong. I mean, it's really about a conversation. If anything, we'll learn something new from a guest that's coming on the show, and we could change our perspective. We're not coming here with just our ideas. And it wasn't like, we read one book and here we are talking. We've done what is it? I think I've done about 20 something years of research about many, many different things that I care about. But at the same time, I've focused more on the enemies and what they've been writing about us, so I can learn how to be able to talk to them and maybe they have something relevant. And I have changed my ways in my life. I voted conservative. I voted liberal, never NDP or Green Party, because they're too extreme for me. But the whole idea here is we are here to really have that conversation. So we urge anyone that's watching the show today, if you want to come on as a guest, you want to talk about something where you're empowering the world, where you want to challenge, you want to be able to give us some information that we don't know about, or you want to challenge one of us about anything, whether it's in the Indigenous Canadians, whether it's, Jews of Judea, whether it's anything, when it comes to politics, we are here for you. Ryan, this is honestly, like, I'm getting jitters. I'm so excited about this. Our next guests are going to be influential people. So is there somebody that you're going to bring on the show that you're excited for? Someone from your group of friends that you think would come on and have something amazing to say? Is there someone that you're thinking about?
Yeah. Oh, there's quite a few. I mean, I've been lucky. Look, my dad teases me. He actually calls me like the Forrest Gump of Indians, because somehow, some way, I always end up in these random situations where I meet people that, some random Indian from Paddle Prairie has no business meeting. So, I mean, I've got friends like Tanya Georgilakis. Her husband was the digital propaganda guy for ISIS, and he happened to also be the Muslim person who was teaching me about Islam. So she's become rather famous talking about radicalization in the Muslim community. So all these people that think I'm an Islamophobe, they probably don't know this, but I sent her money so that she could get out of Syria and return to her family, because she was a pregnant lady living in Syria in the middle of a civil war, and she had no way to get out of there. So I tried to help her out a bit, where I could. So I mean, I'm excited to maybe talk to her. I'm excited to talk to people like Richard Kemp. He was in charge of the Allied forces in Afghanistan. He's a brilliant man. I've had the great fortune to get to sit and hang out with him. We speak together often at the Club Z conferences, and he's a brilliant guy. Like, you talk to him, it's not just about terrorism and stuff. You can talk to him about almost anything. He's just a very erudite person. I've got other friends like Kay Wilson. She survived a terror attack, a horrific terror attack in Israel, and she knows more about Christianity than any Christian I've ever met. Why? Because she was a tour guide and she focused on Christians. I mean, these are people that I've just been blessed to meet, and I'd love to have them on. Rudy Rockman is a young guy that I took him to APAC with me a couple of years ago, and we talked a little bit about Indigenous stuff, and now Rudy's branched out and he's done amazing work. I mean, he's reaching out more to like the lefty side of things, but he's a brilliant kid, great speaker. I'd love to have him on. There's so many people that I would love to have on, that I'm hoping that if I reach out, we'll see what happens.
Well, I hope so, and I hope to also get liberals to come on the show, because this is not a conservative show, and I want people to understand that just because we happen to be current conservatives, and like, meaning in terms of voting, because I don't know, being anti Trudeau, but that's a whole different story. We align in all different places. I mean, caring about women's rights and gay rights, these are all liberal ideas, right? But really, it's about having conversations. And I think we want to open up the floor to anyone out there who is interested to come on the show, to come and talk to us, to even give us another perspective, as long as, just like Ryan said, that it's done in a nice way, where we're not here to try to belittle anyone. We're not here to try to hurt anyone. We're here to actually learn and educate. Ryan, this was amazing. I look forward to having our next show together. And I want to wish you a happy Thanksgiving, and to everybody out there, happy Sukkot. I don't know if you could say happy Mental Health Day, but may it be a good day. And until next time, please let us know how you want to get in. Actually, we'll let you know how you can get in touch with us at Be Offended Podcast, BEE Offended Podcast. Till next time, from Ryan, myself, Ron, have yourself an amazing, amazing rest of the day.
I appreciate it. I just want to say one thing really quick too, because you hit on it when you talked about we're conservatives right now. The truth of the matter is, the reason we call ourselves radical centrists isn't because we sit on the fence. A radical centrist isn't somebody that just sits on the fence about everything, because you would think a centrist just means that we always try to be in the middle and we never take a side. The truth is, we always take a side.
Absolutely.
There's no guarantee that we're going to take the side on the right or the side on the left. We try to do that based on the facts for each given situation. So like you said, we support gay rights, absolutely. We support women's rights, absolutely. These are the kinds of things that, are kind of co-opted, and somebody will say, well, that's only the left or that's only the right. The truth is, we're not left or right. We're radical centrists. We base each opinion we have is based strictly on that situation. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
No, it's great. Listen, I'm trying to close down. I'm trying to have my segment. I'm trying to, to put it all together. But definitely, we are the radical centrists, and there are going to be people who are going to hate it. There are going to be people who are going to be, tuning us off or saying radical things about us. But that's okay. We're big boys. We can put our big boy pants on and have a conversation about it. And I think it's time to bring back dialogue. I think it's important. I think that's the only way to make a real change, is by not shutting someone down, but by listening and trying to come up with some sort of solution to help both sides, left and right, because at the end of the day, we're all in this together. There is no such thing as left and right. There is just us at the end of the day. Ryan, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And I look forward to another episode with you.
Thanks, Ron. I'm having a good time.
All right. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the Be Offended podcast. Yes. Subscribe below at Be Offended podcast on Facebook. Coming to you live every Monday, 9 p.m. Stay tuned.